Syracuse is facing some elite quarterbacks in 2025.
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and thank you for making us your first listen of every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day, and we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And on today's show, Syracuse football is facing some really good quarterbacks next season. Some early Heisman Front-Runners, other quarterbacks to keep an eye on, and plus, we'll also go over the quarterback edge for some teams in 2025. Plenty to talk about here on this edition of Locked On Syracuse. And before we get to all of that, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. And Super Bowl 59 is here, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers can bet just $5. And if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Syracuse football is going to be facing some Heisman Front-Runners in 2025. That's right. FanDuel released the early odds, I know it's early, of the 2025 Heisman Trophy. And the Orange are going to face 4 quarterbacks that are currently top 15 in the Heisman odds right now. Let's go over them, all right? You got Cade Klubnik from Clemson, tied for 3rd in the odds, and Syracuse is playing Clemson in week 4 of 2025. There were a lot of doubts about Cade Klubnik, myself included, heading into last season. He was a big-time high school recruit heading over to the Clemson Tigers, and in 2023, let's all be honest, if you're a Clemson fan that has stumbled upon this podcast, he wasn't that great in 2023. His first full season as a starter, he plays in 13 games, 64% completion percentage, that's pretty good, 2,800 yards, 19 touchdowns to 9 interceptions. It wasn't that he had a terrible year, he just didn't have that wow, oh my goodness, this is like the next big-time quarterback for Clemson football. And then 2024 happened. And he improved significantly. And Syracuse football, they didn't face him last season. They did play him in 2023. But they're going to be seeing a different version from that guy in 2023. In 2024, he played in 14 games, 63% completion percentage, 3,600 yards, 36 touchdowns to just 6 interceptions. Ladies and gentlemen, that is a 6-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio. That means for every 6 touchdowns that he threw, he would only throw 1 interception. Usually a good to really good touchdown to interception ratio is around 2, 2.5, 3-to-1. He had 6-to-1 last season. So he threw a lot of touchdowns, and he typically kept the ball out of harm's way. And he also can run a little bit. Over 400 rushing yards and 7 rushing touchdowns. You can make an argument that Cade Klubnik next season is the best quarterback that Syracuse football is going to face. And there's good reason for why he is tied for 3rd on FanDuel in Heisman Trophy odds. Next up, let's talk about the quarterback from Tennessee, Nico Iamaleava. He is also tied for 3rd in Heisman odds, and Syracuse football is opening up the season against Tennessee and Atlanta in week 1. With Nico, I will also admit with you on this one, it's more projection. It is, because this was a 5-star recruit in 2023, one of the best overall players in the nation when he committed to Tennessee. 2024, he gets his chance to be a full-time starter, and he did pretty well. Played in 13 games, 64% completion percentage, 2,600 yards, 19 touchdowns to 5 interceptions. He also can run a little bit, over 350 yards and 3 touchdowns. So it really is projection. Those are good numbers, but they're definitely not Heisman Trophy numbers. I think we can, even if you're a Tennessee fan that has come across this podcast, we can agree on that. So he had a good year last year, and we'll see whether or not he really takes that jump into the Heisman conversation. But the sports books seem to be high on him. And you know what? He's probably going to be pretty good considering his pedigree. Former top quarterback in 2023 high school recruiting. Next up, you got Carson Beck at Miami. He transferred from Georgia. He's tied for 9th in the Heisman odds. And Here's the thing with Carson Beck, all right? He was among the favorites heading into 2024 to be the number one pick in the 2025 NFL draft, which is going to happen in just a few months from now. And he underachieved. He did. Don't get me wrong. Carson Beck underachieved in 2024 with Georgia, considering the fact that the expectation was he's going to have a huge year and then he's going to declare for the NFL draft and be a top 3 NFL draft pick. He kind of underachieved. But that doesn't make him bad. That doesn't mean he's not good. He actually had a really good year. It's just perspective. It's expectations. And relative to expectations, he underachieved because I'm going to give you Carson Beck's numbers right now. And I bet you didn't think that he had these numbers considering the national perception of him, which is that he's okay. 13 games at Georgia, right? 65% completion percentage. You'd call that pretty good, right? 3,500 yards. That's pretty solid. 28 touchdowns to 12 interceptions. So that's really the killer. He threw a lot of picks last year. He put the ball more in harm's way in 2024 as opposed to 2023. But at minimum, I would expect that Carson Beck is going to be a really good starter for Miami next season. And by the way, forgot to mention Syracuse is playing at Miami on November 8th. The concern really with Carson Beck, to me, it's not about ability with him. I know he's good. I know he is good, but he got hurt. I want to say it was in the SEC title game. And it was his right elbow, which is his throwing arm. And he had to get surgery, season-ending surgery, could not participate in the college football playoff. So we'll see how his recovery goes. Honestly, it would more hurt him in the beginning of the season than when Syracuse actually faces him in early November. But still, you never know how someone's going to recover. So if you are worried about Carson Beck because of injury, fine. But if you don't think he's very good, I don't know what to tell you. He is a really good quarterback, top 10 in Heisman odds for 2025. And finally, who do you think is the last one before I mention his name? Who do you think? There's a lot of quarterbacks that Syracuse is facing that are really good. Did you guess Kevin Jennings from SMU? That's right. He's tied for 13th in the Heisman odds over on FanDuel Sportsbook, playing at SMU on October 4th. That is Syracuse. 2024 was Kevin Jennings' first year as a full-time starter, but he also has a very interesting story. See, Preston Stone was originally the guy for SMU, and he had a big year in 2023, and it was expected that he was going to be one of the better quarterbacks in the ACC in 2024. So him and Kevin Jennings kind of rotated the first 3 games of the season, but then Kevin Jennings just took the job. He just took the job. That's the best way to describe it. After SMU's loss to week 3, Kevin Jennings became the full-time starter, and he did great. He played in 14 games, 65% completion percentage, 3,200 yards, 23 touchdowns to 11 interceptions. He can also run a little bit as well, 350 yards and 5 touchdowns. Overall, when you look at this group of 4, Klubnik, Nico from Tennessee, Carson Beck, Jennings, that's a really, really good group of quarterbacks that Syracuse is facing next season. And for good reason, they are all top 15 in Heisman Trophy odds on FanDuel Sportsbook. You don't think those matter? Well, you know what? There's a reason why FanDuel Sportsbook exists, right? They're usually right. So that's some pretty good quarterbacks they're facing. And there are plenty more to mention. So we'll talk about that next. Super Bowl 59 is here. 1 game, 2 teams, endless possibilities, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action. With live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate, plus knowing that you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, that's the icing on the cake. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59. I'm Jackson Holzer, and this is Locked On Syracuse, and thank you for making us your first listen of every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We went over some Heisman hopeful quarterbacks for 2025 that Syracuse football is going to face. But these quarterbacks that I'm going to mention, even though they're not appearing in the top 20 on FanDuel, I'm going to let you know right now, I would not be surprised if any of these quarterbacks I'm going to mention that Syracuse is facing next season creeps their way into the Heisman conversation. I would not be surprised one bit. We're going to go in chronological order in terms of the schedule. Okay, so if you are a fan of another team and you're sitting here saying, how can you rank this guy out of that guy? All I'm doing is when Syracuse is playing that specific quarterback or scheduled to. Number one, you got Darian Mensah, a transfer from Tulane heading to Duke for 2025, and Syracuse is playing Duke at home this season, September 27th. Now, Duke actually got good quarterback play, in my opinion, from Malik Murphy in 2024, but they wanted to upgrade. And so they land on Darian Mensah, who had a fine year over at Tulane. Now, the concern for Darian Mensah is this. He is coming from the group of five. That is a legitimate concern. Now, some quarterbacks, they can transition seamlessly from the group of five into the Power Four, or what once was the Power Five. But you get the idea. An example that I wrote down here in my notes is Dillon Gabriel. He put up monster numbers at UCF from 2019 to 2021 before UCF was in a Power Four conference. I believe they were in the American Conference when Dillon Gabriel was there. Well, he transferred to Oklahoma, he transferred to Oregon, and he put up ridiculous numbers again at those schools. So that's an example of a quarterback who goes from group of five into a power conference, and it's like they don't miss a beat. They're still really good. However, sometimes you have the opposite. And we saw a few of those examples in the ACC last year, perhaps none bigger than NC State's Grayson McCall. Grayson McCall was a 3-time Sun Belt Player of the Year before he transferred to NC State. He goes to NC State last year, and I get he dealt with injuries. He had that really terrible head-neck injury where he ran into the line of scrimmage and he just got popped. But even when he was healthy, he wasn't very good. I mean, you saw him against Tennessee, right? He was not very good in that game at all. That's an example of someone who just does not translate from the group of five into the Power Four. It is a different game. So we'll see how Darian Mensah adjusts from Tulane to Duke, but he still has a ton of talent, and he was one of the top quarterbacks available in the transfer portal. And if Duke is just going to throw away Malik Murphy for Darian Mensah, they must know something. Maybe they're colossally wrong, but I think they know something about Darian Mensah. I think he's going to have a really good year. Then you got Eli Holstein from Pitt. Now, Syracuse is actually playing Pitt off a bye again this season. This time it'll be at home on October 18th, and we don't talk about what happened last year against Pitt off a bye. But Syracuse did play Pitt in 2024, so we have seen Eli Holstein. Holstein, he didn't have to do a whole lot in that game. Again, I won't tell you necessarily why. You can go back and check the box score yourself on that one. But in that game, he was 11 of 15, 108 yards, 2 touchdowns, no picks. He didn't have to be special, but he was solid when given the chance, which he wasn't given a big chance in that one. He did not have to. He had a solid first full season as a starter over at Pitt, and he was an Alabama transfer heading into 2024. So perhaps he takes a jump in 2025. I certainly would not be surprised. I would not put him in the top 20 in Heisman Trophy consideration, but when the year is over, I don't think they don't go up to 20, but you get the idea. If he was in the top 20 at some point in Heisman odds next season, Eli Holstein, would not be surprised one bit. And then that leads me to Haynes King over at Georgia Tech. Played at Georgia Tech on October 25th at Georgia Tech. That's a road game. Syracuse has seen Haynes King for the last 2 seasons, 2023 and 2024. Now, Georgia Tech most recently came to the Dome in week 2 of last year, and Syracuse won that game. They didn't win that game because Haynes King played bad. Oh, no, my friends. He was actually one of the only reasons why Georgia Tech had a chance in that game, because he went 29 of 39, which is a 74% completion percentage. I did the math for you. 266 yards, no interceptions. He also ran for over 60 yards and he had 2 rushing touchdowns. This is one of the better dual threat quarterbacks in the country. The last 2 years, he has run for over 10 touchdowns in each season. That's obviously very impressive. And last year, he bumped up his completion percentage by 11 points. It went from around 62% to around 73%. So he got a lot more accurate in 2024 than he has been his entire career. And Georgia Tech, in my opinion, is one of those sneaky teams in 2025. And of course, they are led by their veteran quarterback, Haynes King. So these 3 guys that I just mentioned, Mensah, Holstein, King, they're not one of the Heisman front-runners right now. But at any point of next season, if they are in that conversation, I would not be surprised one bit. And if I'm missing a quarterback on this list of quarterbacks that Syracuse is going to face next year, let me know in the comments section below and give me your thoughts on these guys. Do you think they're very good? Do you think they're overrated, underrated? Who am I missing out? I'd love to hear from you in the comments section below. Now, coming up, we will talk about the quarterback edge that Syracuse football had last season compared to this season. So stick with me here on Locked On Syracuse. Syracuse football has a tough schedule, but the reason why, in my opinion, it looks as daunting as it appears on paper is not just because of the quarterbacks they are facing, but because Syracuse football, as of right now, and there's still plenty of time for this to change, it doesn't appear that they have the quarterback edge in a lot of their games that they are going to play in next season. Please let me explain, all right? So let's talk about last year. Syracuse football last season entered every single game it played in, with the exception of one, with the best quarterback from either side on the field. That was Kyle McCord. He was better than any quarterback that Syracuse faced last season, not named Cam Ward for Miami. And Syracuse football, they beat Miami, right? And Kyle McCord was terrific in that game, and I would say he outplayed Cam Ward in that one. But for all intents and purposes, Cam Ward is a better quarterback, at least right now, and according to NFL draft scouts, than Kyle McCord is. Let's talk about the top quarterbacks that the Orange faced last year, right? You got Cam Ward from Miami. He was head and shoulders the best one the Orange played. But then at number 2, you start getting into a little debate here. I think it might have been Haynes King from Georgia Tech. And as I described, while I think he could have a really big year again in 2025, he's not even one of the 4 quarterbacks listed in the top 15 in Heisman Trophy odds that I talked about at the beginning of the show, right? That Syracuse is going to face. Fernando Mendoza from Cal, they faced last year. He went to Indiana. He's not better than Kyle McCord. CJ Bailey. Now, CJ Bailey may end up being really good, and he certainly had a good true freshman season over at NC State. He wasn't better than Kyle McCord last year. So the point being is that when you look at the quarterback edge that Syracuse had last season, it was over every single opponent on their schedule except for Miami. That was the only team that had a better quarterback. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that that is the only thing that matters. Clearly, it's not. It's not the only thing that matters, because if it was the only thing that mattered, then Syracuse football last year would have gone 11-1 in the regular season, and their one loss would have been a game that they actually won, which was Miami, right? So it's not everything to have the quarterback edge heading into a game, but it means a lot. It's certainly important. I think we can all agree on that. It's important to have the quarterback edge heading into a game. And so right now, it looks so daunting for Syracuse because there is a lot of uncertainty with the quarterback position. If you want to relate it now back to this season, let's say Kyle McCord got the 5th year, right? Let's say that he went through the entire process with the NCAA. Instead of saying, I'm just going to go to the NFL draft because of good feedback, he gets the 5th year from the appeal. We would be looking at this schedule entirely differently, in my opinion, because we'd be sitting here looking at the schedule saying, wow, it's tough, right? You got Tennessee and Miami, and you got to go to Georgia Tech and to SMU. You got all these tough games. At Notre Dame is going to be really hard, right? But you can make an argument that if Syracuse football had Kyle McCord back for this season, he would be the best quarterback on the slate. That Syracuse football would enter every single game next year with the best quarterback of the two sides. You can argue Klubnik. You can argue Nico from Tennessee if you want. Outside of that, I mean, Kyle McCord last year was second team All ACC. So he was ahead of Cade Klubnik. He was ahead of Kevin Jennings. He was ahead of Haynes King. I think he's better than Nico from Tennessee, at least from last year. We'll see how he does this season. That's what it would have looked like with Kyle McCord. If Kyle McCord were on this team, we'd be looking at the schedule a little bit differently. But he's obviously not. And so whoever starts at quarterback in week 1 for Syracuse will be making their first career college start. I'm giving them a chance. I'm giving them a chance no matter who it is. We don't know if they're going to be good or bad, but hey, they could be really good, right? Ricky Collins, he was a former top prospect at LSU as recent as 2023. Luke Carney has a lot of hype. Rich Bellin is in the room as well. Jakari Williams has a lot of hype. Someone could emerge for Syracuse football, and we're sitting here in late August, early September talking about we're looking at the slate of games, and Syracuse football could have the best quarterback. That's entirely possible. But the reason right now the schedule looks the way it looks is because of the quarterback uncertainty. Ricky Collins, I assume he is probably going to be the starter. I think he will be the starter week 1 against Tennessee. He could throw for 300 yards and 3 touchdowns. That could happen. And we would all be thrilled. We'd be saying here, post-game, win, lose, or draw, I think we got our guy in Ricky Collins, and we should feel good the rest of the season that Ricky Collins is our quarterback, and he's going to lead Syracuse to another very good season. But the other thing could occur as well. He could throw for 120 yards and 2 interceptions. The point is that when you look at Syracuse's quarterback room, you just don't know. It's just a massive question mark, and it will remain the biggest question mark on the roster between now, which is January 29th at 4:23 p.m. at the time I'm recording this, until late August when Syracuse football kicks off the season, I should say, against Tennessee. So that's the quarterback edge. It's very important to have the quarterback edge. And when you look at Syracuse football schedule right now, with the uncertainty at quarterback, you just look down the line at the list of games and you look at the list of quarterbacks, you can't tell me that Syracuse football has the edge at quarterback in a lot of those games. That could obviously change, but you can't tell me right now they do, which is why the schedule looks as hard as it looks. As far as what's coming up on the podcast, tonight or early tomorrow morning, there will be a full post-game reaction podcast for Syracuse basketball. And that is because, ladies and gentlemen, Syracuse basketball is playing at Stanford at 11 p.m. Eastern. That's right. I'm going to be a psycho, and I'm going to watch that game at 11 p.m. Eastern. Win, lose, or draw. They win by 30, lose by 30. I will be watching the entirety of that game, and I will have a post-game reaction podcast. So you know what, folks? That podcast will probably be released at 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning, maybe. If you're still up, congratulations to you. Or maybe you live on the West Coast. Maybe you live on the West Coast, so it's really not that bad for you to watch a podcast around midnight. But for those of you on the East Coast or in a different time zone, whatever it is, it'll be in your feed in the morning. So be on the lookout for that full post-game reaction podcast, Syracuse basketball at Stanford tonight. Plus, on Thursday, one more thing, mini podcast, again, talking about Syracuse and Stanford. And then we got ACC squad at 5 p.m. Eastern. And we're going to talk about the schedule on the ACC squad. So be sure to check that out on Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. Thank you for making Locked On Syracuse your first listen today. And for your second listen, check out the Locked On ACC podcast. Alex Dono and Kenton Gibbs, they keep it real and bring you the truth about where your favorite ACC team stands within the conference. Find Locked On ACC on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Folks, thank you all so much for watching. Thank you all so much for listening. If you enjoy this podcast, be sure to hit that like button. And if you really enjoy the podcast, be sure to hit subscribe. Tell all your friends about Locked On Syracuse so this channel can grow and reach all Syracuse Orange fans. And folks, I will see you all again around 2, 3 o'clock in the morning to talk some Syracuse basketball. Take care, everyone.